You know, I'm a New Yorker. It's a hell of a town. I firmly believe that if you could make it here, you can make it anywhere. New York, New York. But here's the thing. New York is horribly governed. New York is absolutely falling apart. And nowhere is this worse than in New York City. What I'm going to bring you today is a local crime story that happened in a wonderful neighborhood, a neighborhood that as a kid I would visit to see nice things, and even as an adult that's making all the money from the sponsors that I have, that's totally rich now, I still can't afford to buy into because it's so expensive and so exclusive. And for a crime to break out in New York City like the one we're going to describe is shocking and honestly probably stressing to a lot of people that live in this city who think that they live in a good neighborhood, because now that there's no bail, now that the criminals appear to have more rights than the everyday citizens, no area is particularly safe. But if you're stressed out, I got news for you. I got a sponsor. It's about getting your stress animal approved. We're going to throw it over to them and then get to the other side. Studies show that service animals can help alleviate some of the symptoms of anxiety and depression. A 2021 study in particular actually showed that the physical symptoms of stress and anxiety, heart rate, blood pressure, and hormones associated with stress actually reduce in the animal's presence. But getting a service animal up until this point has been very difficult. This is one of the reasons why we've made it incredibly easy for you guys. All you have to do is go to approvemypet.com and you can get yourself a service animal. And one of the great things about designating your animal as a service animal is that you're not legally obligated to pay those extra pet deposits. When you fly, if you do the psychiatrical one, you don't have to pay $200 to bring your animal with you on the plane consistently. And overall, it's just a better experience not only for your mental health, but for your pocketbook. Go to approvemypet.com, check it out for yourself, and enjoy a less stressful existence.
38th Avenue is normally a peaceful block here in Bayside, Queens, but this was early Sunday morning. Guns ablaze. It looked and sounded like a war zone.
What you just witnessed was gunfire going off in a neighborhood in Bayside, Queens that was captured on various video doorbell systems. This gunfire pierced through fences, cars, and was an absolute disaster and a shock to the people who lived in this area, because if you're not familiar with how New York City works, Bayside, Queens is an absolutely wonderful neighborhood. Again, I've taken my girlfriend as recently as last week to this neighborhood just to look at all the crazy beautiful houses. This is an area that I would aspire to live in at some point if I haven't crunched the numbers and figured out that I'll likely never be able to buy property there, even though I'm definitely doing a lot better on the internet.com with this YouTube channel. This isn't me pleading poverty. This is me just talking about how nice this neighborhood is. And by the way, you can see some of the niceness in the video. You can see the size of these houses and think about the prices per square foot of real estate in New York City, and make no mistake, just because it's not buildings or what you would think of when you think of Manhattan, this is still within the confines of New York City. There's also a lot of lovely restaurants in the area. There's school zones all over the place. There's signs that say kids at play, so drive slower even where there isn't school zones. So this is not a neighborhood where people expected for gunfire to break out between multiple different people. But the way that this actually happened is even more absurd than this shootout just being captured on all these different videos in this nice neighborhood. Because the way that this happened is that New York has insane laws, and those laws give more rights to criminals than actual everyday citizens. Let me explain.
More than a dozen shots ring out on a quiet Sunday morning. The bullets piercing cars and rattling nerves. Neighbors say the problem comes from one place and one place only.
So everything in this story centers around one house, and the fact that everything in this story centers around one house should make solving this crime incredibly easy, because you just go knock on the door, talk to the homeowner, and ask them what's going on, and if they participated in any of these crimes, you arrest them, obviously, because just because you own a house doesn't mean you can do whatever you want and commit whatever crimes in the neighborhood. Now, that is true. Owning a house would not allow you to commit whatever crimes you want in a neighborhood, but apparently in the city of New York, squatting in a house does confer those rights onto you. because this house is not occupied by a homeowner. In fact, it was foreclosed on, and the homeowner, who actually appears in this local news segment to say, "Stop blaming me for this, I turned this house over to the bank," tells you that.
Meanwhile, the former property owner, Joseph Carollo, who lives nearby, showed up here as well to say he hopes neighbors don't hold him responsible.
In 2018, I gave the house back to the bank. Okay?
So you have no legal authority to do anything?
Zero.
So if the homeowner doesn't own the house, obviously the bank owns the house. Whoever he got the mortgage from, that's who it was returned to because he was in foreclosure in that home. However, the bank can't really do anything because during the course of them trying to process this property, which by the way, if listed would probably sell for $2 to $3 million. Let me say that again, $2 to $3 million, because apparently some out-of-state people with out-of-state plates just started occupying the home, and apparently it's impossible to be evicted in the city of New York, which I already knew, and that was even before the COVID-19 moratoriums.
Surveillance video capturing it all. Residents say it's due to squatters at this home on the corner of 209th Street. They have out-of-state plates, and some don't even live here anymore.
Yeah, that's right. The balance between property rights from the property owner and tenants' rights in the city of New York is so out of whack that even illegal tenants, squatters, people who have no right to stay at the property, people who are actually in reality stealing the property, have more rights than the actual property owner. But the COVID-19 restrictions fueling this actually go one step further, because while you can't evict anybody, and by the way, it's nearly impossible to evict anybody in the city of New York anyway, it's a month-long process, it's a total disaster, you get punished for showing any kind of grace to your tenant, like taking partial payments. It's a total disaster, needs reform immediately. The COVID-19 policies around eviction made it impossible to evict these people, so they've been occupying this home for 2 straight years. On top of that, even though they're not paying the water, even though they're not paying the electricity because of COVID-19 restrictions, because everybody was in poverty, you can't shut off their power and you can't shut off their water. Now, I know a lot of people in the left-leaning audience are going to say, look, the bank shouldn't own this property because capitalism is evil. Private property rights are no bueno, and these people have the right to squat there and just occupy this property in this neighborhood in perpetuity, no matter the damage to the neighborhood, because you're so against property rights, because you think it's edgy to be against property rights, because you've never lived in the real world. But here's the thing, before you get on board with these squatters, before you sign up for them and say they're A+ first class all the way, they're also making money off of this property, so they're evil capitalists in that way too, because they're listing the property on Airbnb. So, in the city of New York, you cannot evict somebody for squatting in your property. The COVID-19 restrictions made an already slow process nearly impossible. You can't cut off their power, you can't cut off their water. Those bills just have to be run up and passed on to the people who actually live in the appropriate place and pay the appropriate bills. But those people have the right to rent out the property for profit to Airbnb clients, and you can't do anything about that, even when the clients start shooting the place up.
So these squatters are absentee squatters, if you can imagine how ludicrous that sounds. Absentee squatters who are renting out the place that they are squatting in, that they don't actually own.
Renting it out on Airbnb in ads like these for about 2 years now.
This has been going on for 2 years, and after 2 years, and again, an insane shootout in a really nice neighborhood where this never happens, finally, you have local representatives coming and doing press conferences and talking about how they don't like this stuff.
So these squatters are absentee squatters, if you can imagine how ludicrous that sounds.
Absentee squatters. Again, absurdity just gets stacked on top of absurdity in the wonderful city that I live in, that I swear was not always like this. Even though it was run by majority Democratic governance, we had good mayors that would straighten this stuff out. But they're absentee squatters, and they've been absentee squatters for about 2 years now. 2 years. And even after this crazy shootout, even after all these problems, even with the local governing officials coming to take their picture in front of the camera, to make a stand with the whole neighborhood rallied against these people, even though they have photos of these people's license plates, so they should know, presumably, who these people are and arrest them for the crimes that they obviously committed, like stealing a house that's worth $2 million. It turns out they still can't do anything because New York City laws and regulations don't permit them to do anything about this house, unless it's in total disrepair and needs to be condemned.
The city's Department of Buildings came out here this morning to inspect the property, but say there's little they can do without an immediate hazard. The home, not in great shape, has been in foreclosure for years.
Yes, you heard that right. There is little the city's building inspector can do without an immediate hazard. Now, congratulations to these building inspectors for coming out in the broad daylight, in the sunshine, wearing masks, because at least they're protecting us from the pandemic that has ripped across this city and all that. So I do appreciate them for that. But honestly, I think I would appreciate it a little bit more if they worried less about wearing face masks outdoors where they're not particularly effective, and maybe worried about a system and a city that allows squatters to have more rights than your average everyday New Yorker. The fact that these criminals who are committing fraud and all types of crimes in their actions, again, they stole a house that's probably worth $3 million, are allowed to go unchecked in this area is crazy. The fact that bullets were flying and they flew into car seats of children, which again, just goes to show you the family-oriented nature of this neighborhood, is absurd.
Last weekend's bullets penetrating at least 2 cars and the gunfire going right through a child's car seat.
Occasionally I get comments on this channel from people trying to shame me for not being libertarian enough, but let me explain this to you guys out there in the audience so that you can understand it. I am a libertarian, but libertarians believe in private property rights. A proper role for government is to protect private property rights. You know what is not in line with protecting private property rights? Protecting the rights of criminals to hold on to their properties. You know what is not aligned with libertarian governance? The fact that you can have your rights subordinated by somebody else and somehow their tenants' rights outweigh the actual property owners. The idea that the government can freeze all foreclosures and that can apply to people who are stealing property. That's absurd in every possible way.
And the pandemic had only slowed down that foreclosure process in the courts. The squatters, they knew that and were making money off of it.
Imagine if they froze the seizure of vehicles and somebody carjacked you and then the government was like, well, sad day for you. We can't do anything about it for 2 years. Sorry, not sorry. Bad day for you. I hope you enjoy the rest of your life. They should know who these people are. They should be able to shame them. They should at least put their pictures in the press so you can see these people.
This afternoon, some progress. Airbnb says they've now suspended the listing. Residents just wondering what more it will take so everyone feels safe.
But the only people who were capable of taking any action in this instance, the only people who were capable of restoring some modicum of peace in this neighborhood was the company Airbnb, who pulled the listing when they were told about this scenario. The city of New York, the NYPD, the building inspectors, state representatives, you could bring the governor down here if you wanted to, and apparently none of them have the power to evict these people because that's how absurd a city we actually live in. Look, I often talk about how progressive policies on criminal justice are a product of the successes that we had in criminal justice. They are due to the fact that people have largely forgotten, because it was a generation ago, how bad crime in this country used to be. And the thing is, it's going to have to get worse before things will change. But does it have to get this bad? Does it have to be open warfare in a really upscale neighborhood before people realize that maybe the Democratic Party is kind of lost? Do you have to have state representatives come down in a press conference to show that they're doing something, only to say that they can literally do nothing about this, for you to think that the regulatory system against private property owners might be a bit too strict in New York City, that maybe property rights should take precedent over tenants' rights, especially when the tenants, again, have no right to be there? Does it have to get this horrible? Do this many more people have to die in my city? Nobody died in this shooting, thankfully, but murders are on the rise in New York City. Did we really have to forget and relearn these lessons? These are the questions that you need to ask yourself as you see crime spiking. These are the questions you need to ask yourself when you're going into the voting booth, when you're voting for those progressive district attorneys, when you're voting for the Democrats just to go along to get along. It's not worth it, and the price is high. The price is something that you will have to pay. There's no getting away from it, especially in an area that's so densely populated like New York City, especially in an area which has all this strict gun control regulations that prevent everyday citizens from defending their rights. And even if we did allow citizens, as the Constitution commands, to keep and bear arms, the fact that the self-defense laws in New York City are so stacked against the person defending themselves also is a problem. When people say that criminals have more rights than everyday law-abiding citizens, that should be a hyperbolic statement. That should be something that is more feelings-based, but the factual reality should contradict that. However, in New York City and in New York State, because bail reform is a New York State project, that absolute failure that lets all these criminals back on the streets, they're treating criminals having more rights than everyday citizens as if it's a governing philosophy. And by the way, it's not just happening here. This attitude shift, this sea change in how we view criminals in this nation is happening across the nation, not just in these blue state enclaves. I can show you stories of death row inmates in the state of Texas being released with very little, if not no bond at all, because they got a progressive DA that's backed by Sean King and George Soros. And even if you don't have one of those progressive DAs, one of those people who is ideologically committed to allowing criminals to do whatever they want at the expense of everyday citizens in order to fight racism from 1927, in reality, all the district attorneys, especially those in the Democratic Party, are shifting in that direction anyway, because if you're not one of those people, apparently you have to appease one of those people. This is the real legacy of George Floyd. This goes beyond the Ferguson effect that we were warned about years ago, and if we don't course correct immediately, if we don't turn this thing around right away, then it's going to get far worse. And unfortunately, the more these criminals are allowed to proliferate in our society, the more we tolerate crime. When we do eventually make that U-turn, when we do eventually try to course correct, it's not going to be as effective as quickly, and we're still going to have to bear the consequences of going soft on crime. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts about this story and the overall philosophy behind this story down in the comments below. If you like this video, you can show me by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content. You can follow me on all my social medias. You can support me via the support links in the description box. This has been me talking about an insane story right here in New York City. Till next time.